Norman Rockwell was one of America's most loved painters. He often said, "I paint the different seasons. I paint winter, spring, and summer, but my favorite is summer." People adored his paintings of small-town life, happy families, and moments that felt comforting and pure. But behind all those cheerful images, Rockwell hid a side of himself that few ever saw. In 1964, he painted something that changed everything. It was raw, painful, and honest. The painting showed a side of America that people didn't want to admit existed. It made adults cry and made parents cover their children's eyes. Gallery owners refused to display it, and newspapers declined to print it. But Rockwell painted it anyway, knowing it could destroy everything he had worked for. That painting revealed the real Norman Rockwell, an artist who wasn't afraid to show the truth, even when it hurt. Norman Rockwell was born on February 3, 1894, in Harlem, New York City, at 789 St. Nicholas Avenue. His parents were Jarvis and Nancy Rockwell. His father worked for a textile company in Philadelphia and stayed there his whole life. They didn't have much money, but they managed to live comfortably. Norman had one older brother, also named Jarvis, but the two weren't very close. The family's religious life was mixed. His father was Presbyterian, and his mother was Episcopalian. Norman's family history stretched all the way back to England, to 1635, when an ancestor named John Rockwell sailed to America on a ship called the Hopewell and helped settle Connecticut. Even as a young child, Norman was different. At just 3 years old, he would sit quietly and listen as his father read Charles Dickens out loud. He was fascinated, not just by the stories, but by how Dickens could make characters come alive with words. His father liked to copy drawings from books, and Norman would watch him carefully. That's when something inside him woke up. His mother's father had been an artist too, though he never earned much and mostly painted landscapes. Still, that creative spark ran in the family. Their small home was filled with stories, sketches, and quiet dreams. That environment shaped who Norman became. By the age of 9, Norman already felt like he didn't fit in. He was skinny, awkward, and clumsy, and he often got teased. Drawing became his escape. It gave him control and comfort in a world that often felt confusing. He would spend hours sketching alone, filling notebooks with faces, expressions, and funny moments. That same year, his family moved from New York City to Mamaroneck, a small town in Westchester County. The move changed his life. There, Norman found open skies, quiet streets, and a slower pace that inspired him. He began to fall in love with the idea of small-town America, a theme that would later define his art. In Mamaroneck, he discovered the work of Howard Pyle, a well-known illustrator of the time, and became obsessed. Norman saved every penny to buy art supplies, even when money was tight. His mother ran a strict religious home, but he never stopped drawing. By age 14, he made a big decision. He left high school to study art full-time at the Chase School of Fine and Applied Art in New York City. Every day, he took the train back and forth from Mamaroneck, determined to make his dream a reality. He later transferred to the National Academy of Design and then to the Art Students League, where he learned from great teachers like Thomas Fogarty, George Bridgman, and Frank Dumond. Fogarty taught him to tell stories through pictures, and Bridgman showed him how to draw the human body with precision. That's when Norman realized that fine art wasn't his path. His real talent was illustration. He wanted to tell stories people could feel. At just 18, he got his first big job illustrating stories for Carl Claudy's Tell Me Why series. He earned $150, a huge amount for him at the time. The job led him to meet Edward Cave, the founder of Boys Life magazine, who hired him to draw for the Boy Scouts. By 19, Norman was the full-time art editor of Boys Life, an incredible achievement for someone so young. He created hundreds of images that shaped how America saw the Boy Scouts, showing adventure, friendship, and innocence. His work became so popular that the Boy Scout calendar became the best-selling calendar in the country. In 1915, Rockwell convinced his family to move to New Rochelle, New York, where many top illustrators lived. There, he rented a studio with his friend Clyde Forsyth in a barn that once belonged to the famous Western artist Frederick Remington. Forsyth encouraged him to submit his art to the Saturday Evening Post, the most prestigious magazine in America at the time. Norman's first Post cover appeared in May 1916 when he was just 22. It was an instant success, and by the next year, he had painted 6 covers for the magazine. By his mid-20s, Rockwell was one of the most recognized illustrators in the country. But the fame came with pressure. He worked tirelessly and often doubted himself. He felt insecure about his looks and his worth. He once said, "All I had was the ability to draw, which, as far as I could see, didn't count for much." Instead of giving up, he poured those feelings into his art. He painted people who felt awkward, shy, and overlooked, people like himself, and in doing so, made millions feel seen. In 1916, he married Irene O'Connor, a schoolteacher. But the marriage was troubled from the start. Irene wanted a quiet home life, while Norman was consumed by his work. They grew distant, and though they stayed together for 14 years, they eventually divorced in 1930. The same year, Norman married Mary Barstow, a young teacher and writer. Together they had 3 sons, Jarvis, Thomas, and Peter. Even though his career was thriving, Norman often struggled mentally. In 1933, he was hospitalized for what doctors called nervous exhaustion. He felt trapped by his own success. Everyone saw his paintings of happy families and perfect moments, but inside, he felt lonely and full of doubt. His therapist, Eric Erickson, helped him realize that his paintings were his way of healing from a cold and distant childhood. His mother had been strict and emotionally distant, and his art was his way of creating the warmth he longed for. In 1942, inspired by President Roosevelt's famous Four Freedoms speech, Rockwell painted 4 works: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. The Saturday Evening Post wasn't sure about publishing them at first, fearing controversy. But Rockwell believed in them deeply and funded the project himself. He used his neighbors as models, capturing real people living real American lives. When the paintings were finally released in 1943, they became national treasures. They toured across 16 cities, helping raise over $132 million for the war effort, equal to more than $2 billion today. But even his most patriotic work stirred anger. Some people hated freedom of worship because it showed people of different races and religions praying together. Rockwell received hate mail accusing him of promoting racial equality and un-American ideas. Yet he didn't back down. For the rest of his career, he continued to paint what he believed in: truth, kindness, and humanity, even when it made people uncomfortable. Norman Rockwell may have been known as the painter of happy scenes, but behind every brushstroke was a man who knew pain, loneliness, and courage. His art wasn't just about small-town America, it was about the hope that people could be better than they were. In the 1940s, Norman Rockwell was one of the most famous painters in America, but behind his success, he went through deep personal struggles, shocking losses, and powerful transformations that changed the meaning of his art forever. After his famous Four Freedoms paintings toured across the country, raising millions of dollars for the war effort, not everyone welcomed them. Some cities in the South refused to display the posters because they showed people of different races worshiping together. Still, the tour became a huge success, drawing over 1 million visitors and raising what would be billions in today's money. But that same year, in late 1943, tragedy struck. Rockwell's studio caught fire and burned to the ground. The flames destroyed hundreds of his paintings, sketches, costumes, props, and personal belongings, everything he had built over the years. The loss was estimated at $100,000 back then, worth more than $1.5 million today. Some people said the fire started accidentally from ashes from Rockwell's pipe. Others, including Rockwell himself, believed it might have been arson because he'd recently argued with a neighbor about property lines. No one ever proved anything. What mattered most was that his life's work had vanished overnight. His neighbors came together to comfort him, bringing new pipes to replace the ones he lost. Their kindness reminded him why he loved small-town life. That same year, 1943, he painted one of his most famous works, Rosie the Riveter, for the Saturday Evening Post. Rosie was a strong, confident woman in overalls, sitting proudly with a sandwich in hand and crushing Hitler's book under her foot. She was based on a real 19-year-old telephone operator named Mary Louise Doyle. Norman exaggerated her size and strength to symbolize the power of American women during the war. Later, he said he felt a little guilty for changing her so much. But Rosie became an icon of female strength. Many male readers, however, were outraged. They canceled their magazine subscriptions, saying it was unnatural for women to do men's work. Rockwell didn't care. He had helped define a new kind of American hero. While his career soared, his personal life was falling apart. His wife Mary's drinking had worsened badly by the 1940s and 1950s. She began spending long stays at the Austin Riggs Center, a psychiatric hospital about 90 minutes from their Vermont home. Sometimes she was gone for months. In 1952, she even underwent electroshock therapy. Norman was lonely and overwhelmed. He sought emotional comfort in the people he painted, quietly forming connections with the models who inspired his work. By 1953, the family moved to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, so Mary could be closer to the treatment center. Norman began therapy too, trying to deal with his own anxiety, depression, and exhaustion from years of pressure and deadlines. In 1946, he released his autobiography, My Adventures as an Illustrator. He described his insecurities and fear of failure, but he left out the darkest parts, like his suspected use of amphetamines to keep up with his intense workload. He wrote about happiness while silently battling sadness and stress. Most people thought the move to Stockbridge was just for peace and inspiration, but the truth was that Mary's health was getting worse. Norman worked harder than ever, painting covers and advertisements to pay for her treatments. Their home looked perfect from the outside, but inside, it was filled with worry and pain. Then, in the early 1950s, another blow came when Norman's son Peter publicly accused him of being emotionally distant and obsessed with his work. The scandal shocked everyone. But later, family letters showed that Norman had tried to be a good father. He helped his sons financially, supported their projects, and even built a small art studio for his oldest son, Jarvis. Still, his perfectionism often kept him away from his family for long hours. He could spend a whole year finishing a single magazine cover, repainting it again and again until it was flawless. In 1959, tragedy hit again. Mary died suddenly of a heart attack. Norman was heartbroken. He poured his grief into his paintings, but magazine editors rejected the darker, sadder works, insisting that he go back to painting cheerful scenes. His therapist, Eric Erickson, told him, "You paint your happiness, but you don't live it." That truth hurt deeply. Norman continued working, but the pain never left him. In 1961, at age 67, he married again, this time to a retired teacher named Molly Punderson. He admitted openly that it wasn't a love match, he needed help managing his life and career. Molly was organized and calm, and she brought stability after years of chaos. Their marriage lasted until he died, giving him much-needed peace in his final years. Then came 1963, marking the end of an era. After 47 years and 321 covers, Norman left the Saturday Evening Post. His last cover was a portrait of President John F. Kennedy after the assassination. But by then, Rockwell had grown tired of painting the same kind of images, smiling white families, happy small towns, and idealized moments. The magazine had strict rules. Black Americans could only appear in the background or as servants. Norman hated that. "I portrayed the best of all possible worlds," he said, "but that kind of stuff is dead now." He was ready to face reality. In 1964, he joined Look magazine, which gave him freedom to paint social issues that truly mattered to him: civil rights, injustice, and poverty. But speaking the truth came with danger. As soon as he started painting about race, he received threatening letters. Some people called him a traitor to his race, others warned that he'd regret it if he kept showing black children or exposing racism. The threats were serious, but he didn't stop. At age 70, Rockwell painted one of his most powerful and controversial works, The Problem We All Live With. It showed 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, the first black child to attend an all-white elementary school in the South, walking to class guarded by U.S. Marshals. On the wall behind her were racist slurs and a splattered tomato. The painting stunned the nation. Many readers were furious. Thousands canceled their subscriptions to look. But Rockwell didn't back down. He used a local girl as Ruby's model, and the message was unmistakable: America needed to see the truth. Throughout the 1960s, Rockwell tried to correct how he had once depicted black people in his earlier work. He reached out to civil rights leaders, talked with activists, and worked hard to show black Americans with dignity, strength, and independence. He didn't want to be seen as a savior. He wanted to paint them as heroes of their own stories. In 1964, after hearing about the brutal murders of 3 young civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, in Mississippi, Rockwell was devastated. He couldn't sleep or stop thinking about it. He poured his anguish into a haunting painting called Murder in Mississippi, showing the men's final moments surrounded by shadows of their killers. He spent 5 weeks working on it and nothing else. The painting captured the horror and courage of that night. In 1967, he painted New Kids in the Neighborhood, showing black and white children meeting each other for the first time after schools were desegregated. It was quiet and simple but full of hope. Rockwell was 73 then, tired but still fighting for truth through his art. In 1978, 7 of Rockwell's paintings were stolen from a gallery in Minnesota, one of the biggest art thefts in the state's history. One of the stolen works, Taking a Break, resurfaced 40 years later in 2017, found hidden in a New Jersey home after being bought decades earlier for just a few dollars. Even after his death, new mysteries followed him. In 2013, biographer Deborah Solomon claimed that Rockwell had hidden erotic sketches and might have struggled with repressed desires, possibly toward men. Some experts agreed, but Rockwell's granddaughter and others said the claims were unfair. The truth remains uncertain. In 1977, President Gerald Ford awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest honor for a civilian. Rockwell, then 83 and very ill, didn't attend. His son Jarvis accepted the medal for him. In private, Norman confessed that he sometimes felt he had sold out, that he'd chosen money and popularity over deeper art. He wondered if he'd missed his true purpose. Norman Rockwell died on November 8, 1978, at age 84. After his death, people discovered that he had more than $50,000 in unpaid therapy bills, proof of a lifetime spent battling anxiety and depression while painting happiness for the world. In 2004, decades after his death, something extraordinary happened. Behind a fake wall in another artist's home, someone found Rockwell's original Breaking Home Ties, one of his most beloved works. The man had hidden it for years during a messy divorce. When it finally went to auction in 2006, it sold for $15.4 million. The discovery left people wondering, how many more hidden Rockwell masterpieces might still be out there, tucked away behind walls, waiting to be found.